Welcome back to Nighttime History. Tonight we are stepping into the hushed halls of an ancient Roman library, where knowledge lived on papyrus scrolls and the gentle work of cataloguing never truly ended. Thank you for joining us on this peaceful journey through time. Find your most comfortable position, close your eyes if you wish, and let us drift together into a world where cedar oil perfumed the air and bone labels marked each precious scroll. Tonight we explore the quiet, methodical world of those who kept humanity's wisdom safe. You stand in the cool marble entrance of the Bibliotheca Ulpia, built by Emperor Trajan in the 2nd century. Sunlight filters through tall windows, casting long rectangles of warmth across polished floors. The air carries the distinctive scent of cedar oil, a precious substance used to protect scrolls from insects and decay. Most people think Roman libraries were dusty, neglected places, but actually they were vibrant centers of learning, carefully maintained and surprisingly well organized for their time. Your sandals whisper against stone as you move deeper into the main hall. Towering shelves line the walls, each one filled with cylindrical scroll cases made of wood, leather, or bronze. These containers, called capsae, protect their contents from light and moisture. The soft tapping of bone against wood echoes from somewhere nearby as a librarian checks labels against his wax tablet inventory. The head librarian, a Greek freedman named Marcus, moves between the shelves with practiced ease. His tunic is ink-stained at the sleeves, a badge of his profession. In his weathered hands, he holds a scroll case, turning it slowly to read the small bone tag tied to its handle with hemp cord. These labels, called tituli, contain all the essential information written in neat Greek letters that have been carefully inked and sealed. You watch as Marcus opens his wax tablet and makes a small mark with his bronze stylus. The soft scraping sound fills the quiet space. Roman libraries did not use the alphabetical system we know today. Instead, they organized scrolls by subject, then by author, and sometimes by the length of the work. Geography lived near history. Poetry nestled close to drama. Philosophy claimed its own special alcoves. The morning light grows stronger, illuminating dust motes that dance in the air like tiny spirits. A junior scribe approaches Marcus, carrying an armload of newly copied scrolls. Each one needs its own label, its own place in the vast system of knowledge. The young man sets his burden down gently on a reading table made of smooth cypress wood. Most people imagine that Roman scribes worked frantically, rushing to copy texts before they deteriorated. But actually, the process moved with deliberate care. Speed meant mistakes, and mistakes in a world without printing presses could mean losing knowledge forever. You hear the gentle unfurling of papyrus as Marcus examines a scroll about Egyptian astronomy. The material makes a soft, rustling sound, like autumn leaves stirring in a breeze. The papyrus itself tells a story of distant places and careful craft. Made from reeds that grew along the Nile River, each sheet represents days of soaking, pressing, and drying under the African sun. Roman merchants paid premium prices for the finest grades, which felt smooth as silk beneath exploring fingers. Lower quality papyrus, with its rougher texture and darker colour, served for practice work and temporary notes. Marcus dips a small brush into a ceramic pot of cedar oil. The liquid gleams golden in the light as he applies it carefully to the edges of an older scroll. This ritual happens regularly, part of the endless cycle of preservation. Cedar oil came from Lebanon, where ancient trees grew on mountain slopes. The Romans discovered that this precious substance not only waterproofed papyrus, but also repelled the tiny insects that could devour entire libraries. A soft footstep announces the arrival of Claudia, one of the few female readers allowed in this particular library. She wears a simple stola and carries herself with the quiet confidence of someone comfortable among books. Roman libraries served a surprisingly diverse community, though access depended on social class and education. Slaves could enter only as assistants to their masters. Women faced restrictions that varied by city and time period. You follow Claudia as she approaches a section dedicated to medical texts. Her fingers trace along the bone labels, reading each one carefully. The organization system becomes clearer as you watch. Medical scrolls occupy 3 large shelving units, subdivided by specialty. Surgical procedures cluster together near treatises on herbal remedies. Dental care, a more advanced field than most people realize, has its own small but important section. The soft sound of unrolling papyrus fills the reading area as Claudia settles at a table with her chosen scroll. Reading in ancient Rome required physical skill as much as intellectual ability. Scrolls could stretch 20 feet or more when fully extended. Readers developed techniques for managing these unwieldy texts, using both hands to roll and unroll sections while keeping their place. Let us stop here for a moment to appreciate this peaceful journey we are taking together. If you are finding comfort in these quiet halls of ancient knowledge, please consider joining our community of nighttime travelers by subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications. A gentle like helps support our work and lets us know you are enjoying these restful explorations of history. We would love to hear in the comments where you are settling in to sleep tonight and what time it is in your corner of the world. Thank you for being part of this journey. Near the back wall, a specialized area houses the library's most precious possessions. Here, in climate-controlled alcoves, rest scrolls of extraordinary value. Some contain the only surviving copies of works by famous authors. Others preserve ancient languages that few people can still read. A dedicated keeper, usually a trusted slave with exceptional skills, maintains these treasures with almost religious devotion. The preservation techniques used in Roman libraries would impress modern conservators. Scrolls were stored horizontally to prevent sagging. Moisture levels were controlled through strategic placement of oil lamps and braziers. Temperature stayed relatively constant in the thick-walled stone buildings that housed most major libraries. Careful inventory systems tracked each scroll's condition, location, and borrowing history. You notice a young apprentice carefully cleaning bone labels with a soft cloth. This seemingly simple task requires considerable skill. Too much pressure could crack the delicate material. Too little would leave the writing illegible. The bone itself came from sheep or cattle, carefully prepared by craftsmen who understood how to create smooth, durable writing surfaces. The catalogue system, while different from modern approaches, showed remarkable sophistication. Master lists, written on longer scrolls or wooden tablets, recorded every holding. These catalogues noted not just titles and authors, but also the physical condition of each scroll, when it was last copied, and whether complete versions existed elsewhere. Roman librarians maintained extensive correspondence with colleagues in other cities, sharing information about rare texts and arranging exchanges. As afternoon approaches, the library's rhythm shifts subtly. Morning hours typically belonged to serious scholars and official business. Later in the day, a broader range of visitors might arrive. Students came to copy passages for their studies. Wealthy Romans browsed for entertainment, seeking the latest poetry or popular histories. Even some merchants, particularly those dealing in luxury goods, consulted geographical texts and travel accounts. The sounds of the library create their own peaceful symphony. Papyrus whispers against itself as scrolls are opened and closed. Styluses scratch against wax tablets. Quiet conversations murmur in corners where readers discuss complex passages. Bronze scroll cases click softly as they are opened and closed. Sandals shuffle across stone floors worn smooth by generations of knowledge seekers. Marcus pauses in his cataloguing to examine a scroll that shows signs of wear. The papyrus has darkened with age, and small tears threaten to spread if not addressed soon. This scroll will need recopying, a process that could take weeks depending on its length and complexity. He makes a note on his wax tablet, adding this title to the growing list of restoration projects. The copying process itself followed strict protocols. Master scribes worked from the best available versions, often comparing multiple copies to ensure accuracy. They wrote in clear, standardized scripts that prioritized legibility over artistic flourish. Every copy was proofread at least twice, once by the scribe himself and again by a senior colleague. Errors discovered after completion were corrected with careful overwriting or, in serious cases, by cutting out sections and inserting new pieces of papyrus. The scribes who worked in Roman libraries came from surprisingly diverse backgrounds. Many people assume all ancient scribes were slaves, but actually a significant number were freedmen or even freeborn citizens who chose this profession for its intellectual rewards and social respect. The most skilled scribes could earn comfortable livings, often receiving payment that exceeded what many craftsmen made in traditional trades. You watch as a master scribe named Gaius examines a partially damaged scroll of Virgil's poetry. His fingers move with the delicate precision of a surgeon as he assesses each torn section. Years of experience have taught him exactly how much pressure papyrus can withstand before it crumbles completely. The morning light reveals the careful concentration in his weathered face as he decides which sections can be salvaged and which require complete recopying. In the corner workspace reserved for restoration, another scribe prepares fresh papyrus for repair work. The process begins with selecting sheets that match the original scroll's colour and texture as closely as possible. Roman scribes developed techniques for aging new papyrus, using weak tea solutions and carefully controlled exposure to sunlight. This attention to detail ensured that repaired sections would not stand out visually from the original text. The tools of their trade rest neatly arranged on wooden shelves built into the wall. Reed pens, cut from marsh plants and carefully shaped with bronze knives, occupy small ceramic holders. Each scribe maintains several pens in different stages of sharpness, knowing that the quality of writing depends heavily on proper tool maintenance. Ink recipes vary by region and preference, but the most common formula combines soot, gum arabic, and water in precise proportions. Most people think ancient scribes worked by candlelight in dimly lit rooms, but Roman libraries actually prioritized natural lighting. Large windows faced east to capture morning sun, considered ideal for detailed work because it provides bright, steady illumination without the harsh glare that develops later in the day. Polished bronze mirrors strategically placed throughout the workspace reflect and redirect light to eliminate shadows. A senior librarian named Quintus moves between the workstations, checking progress on various projects. His role extends far beyond simple supervision. He serves as quality controller, final proofreader, and keeper of institutional standards. The small bronze stylus he carries bears engravings that mark his authority within the library hierarchy. Such symbols of rank were important in Roman society, where social position affected every interaction. You notice how Quintus examines not just the text accuracy, but also the physical presentation of each scroll. Line spacing must remain consistent throughout lengthy works. Margins need to be uniform from beginning to end. Column width should never vary more than a finger's breadth. These standards might seem excessive, but they served practical purposes in a world where readers often shared scrolls and needed predictable formatting to follow along during group readings. The library maintains detailed records of each scribe's output and accuracy rates. Wooden tablets hanging near the work area display weekly statistics showing pages completed, errors caught during proofreading, and materials consumed. This data helps supervisors assign projects appropriately and identify scribes who might benefit from additional training or different types of work. Training new scribes required patience and systematic instruction. Apprentices began by practicing letter formation on reusable wax tablets, where mistakes could be smoothed away and corrected countless times. Only after demonstrating consistent handwriting quality were they allowed to work with actual papyrus. Even then, beginners started with short texts or single-page documents before advancing to longer, more valuable works. The apprentice system created strong bonds between experienced scribes and their students. Master scribes took personal responsibility for their apprentices' development, knowing that poor training could result in damaged texts and wasted materials. You watch as an elderly scribe named Lucius guides his young apprentice's hand, showing him how to maintain consistent letter spacing, while writing quickly enough to maintain productive pace. Specialized scribes handle different types of texts according to their particular skills and interests. Mathematical works required familiarity with numerical symbols and geometric diagrams. Medical texts demanded knowledge of anatomical terminology and drug names that change between regions. Legal documents needed absolute precision, as even minor copying errors could invalidate important contracts or court proceedings. The most prestigious assignment in any Roman library was copying works by famous authors, particularly those whose original manuscripts were deteriorating. These projects required not just technical skill, but also deep knowledge of the author's style, vocabulary, and typical subject matter. Experienced scribes could often identify and correct obvious copying errors from previous generations, gradually improving text accuracy over time. Contrary to popular belief, Roman scribes did not work in complete silence. Quiet conversation was permitted and even encouraged, as discussing difficult passages with colleagues often helped resolve ambiguous text or unclear references. The soft murmur of professional discussion creates a gentle background sound throughout the workspace, punctuated by the scratch of styluses on wax and the whisper of papyrus being unrolled. The daily schedule in Roman libraries followed patterns that maximized both productivity and text preservation. Morning hours, when natural light was strongest and scribes were freshest, were reserved for the most demanding copying work. Afternoon brought maintenance tasks like label checking, scroll repair, and inventory updates. Late afternoon often involved training activities and planning sessions for upcoming projects. Scribes developed physical techniques that allowed them to work for hours without excessive fatigue. Proper posture, with scrolls positioned at specific angles to reduce neck strain, was considered essential professional knowledge. Hand exercises, performed regularly throughout the day, helped prevent the cramping and joint problems that could end a scribe's career. Some libraries even employed massage specialists who understood the particular muscle tensions that affected professional writers. The economics of Roman libraries revealed sophisticated understanding of knowledge preservation costs. Administrators tracked expenses for materials, labour and maintenance with the same attention merchants gave to trade goods. Papyrus prices fluctuated based on Egyptian harvests and Mediterranean shipping conditions. Cedar oil costs varied with Lebanese political stability. These external factors directly influenced library budgets and project planning. Quality control extended beyond individual scrolls to the library's overall collection health. Regular inspections identified scrolls showing early signs of deterioration before damage became irreversible. Librarians maintained detailed condition reports, noting factors like humidity exposure, insect activity, and reader handling patterns that affected preservation. This data helped them develop better storage techniques and handling procedures. The social status of library workers varied considerably within Roman society. While some scribes were indeed slaves, many others enjoyed respected positions comparable to modern professionals. Skilled librarians could advance to administrative roles that brought substantial income and social influence. The head librarian of a major collection like the Bibliotheca Ulpia held rank equivalent to other important civic officials. Evening activities in Roman libraries took on a different character as natural light faded. Oil lamps provided adequate illumination for reading, but were considered too risky for copying work, as dripping oil could destroy months of careful labour. Instead, evening hours were devoted to planning, discussion, and light maintenance tasks that did not require precise vision. The relationship between librarians and their patrons required diplomatic skills as much as scholarly knowledge. Wealthy Romans expected personal attention when consulting library collections. Politicians needed quick access to legal precedents and historical examples. Scholars required detailed assistance locating obscure references. Successfully managing these diverse demands while protecting valuable scrolls from damage required considerable tact and professional judgment. Most people assume Roman libraries were austere, purely functional spaces, but actually many were decorated with marble statues, painted frescoes, and ornate furniture that reflected their cultural importance. The Bibliotheca Ulpia featured portrait busts of famous authors arranged along the walls, creating an inspiring environment for both staff and visitors. Comfortable reading areas with cushioned benches encouraged extended study sessions. The preservation of ancient knowledge depended ultimately on the dedication of these often anonymous library workers. Their patient daily routines, from morning scroll inspection to evening inventory updates, created the foundation that allowed classical literature, philosophy, and science to survive for future generations. In the quiet rustling of papyrus and the soft scratch of styluses, they performed one of history's most important services, often without recognition or lasting fame. The workshop dedicated to scroll preservation occupies a separate chamber within the library complex, its stone walls thick enough to maintain steady temperature and humidity levels. Here, the delicate work of extending papyrus life unfolds with methodical precision. A master conservator named Demetrius examines a scroll under magnification created by a water-filled glass sphere, one of the optical innovations that made detailed repair work possible centuries before proper lenses were invented. The magnifying technique reveals damage invisible to the naked eye. Tiny holes left by book-eating insects, called bibliophagas by the Romans, pepper the papyrus surface like miniature constellations. These creatures, smaller than pinheads, could destroy entire libraries if left unchecked. Roman conservators developed fumigation methods using aromatic woods and specific plant extracts that repelled insects without damaging the papyrus fibers themselves. Demetrius reaches for a brush made from the finest sable hair, imported at considerable expense from the northern forests beyond Germania. The brush tip, no wider than a single papyrus fiber, allows him to apply consolidating agents with surgical precision. Most people think ancient preservation methods were crude and ineffective, but Roman conservators actually developed techniques that modern specialists still admire for their elegance and minimal intervention approach. The consolidating solution itself represents centuries of experimentation and refinement, made from carefully purified tree resins dissolved in precise ratios of wine and water. This mixture penetrates damaged papyrus fibers and strengthens them without changing the original appearance or flexibility. The recipe, closely guarded and passed down through generations of conservators, varies slightly depending on the papyrus origin and age of the damage. You watch as Demetrius prepares a patch for a significant tear in a philosophical text by Marcus Aurelius. The patch material comes from papyrus sheets specially prepared to match the original scroll's thickness and fiber orientation. Creating these matching sheets requires intimate knowledge of papyrus manufacturing techniques, including the specific pressure applied during the original pressing process and the aging patterns that develop over decades of storage. The patching adhesive differs completely from the consolidating solution. Made from fish bladder protein and purified wheat starch, this paste creates strong bonds while remaining reversible if future conservation work requires removing the patch. Roman conservators understood the importance of reversibility long before it became a cornerstone of modern conservation ethics. They knew that future generations might develop better techniques and wanted to avoid permanent alterations that could prevent improved treatments. Temperature control in the conservation workshop relies on an ingenious system of hollow walls connected to a hypercaust heating system. Warm air circulates through channels carved into the stone, maintaining steady conditions without the fire hazards that open flames would create near irreplaceable texts. The system can be adjusted by opening or closing bronze vents, allowing fine control over the working environment. Humidity management proves equally sophisticated. Large ceramic vessels filled with various salt solutions occupy strategic positions around the workshop. Different salts absorb or release moisture at specific humidity levels, creating natural buffering systems that prevent the rapid changes most damaging to papyrus. Roman engineers discovered these principles through careful observation of how different materials behaved in various climates across their vast empire. The tools used for conservation work demonstrate remarkable precision and specialization. Bronze knives, sharpened to razor thinness and carefully shaped for specific tasks, can separate damaged papyrus layers without disturbing adjacent fibers. Ivory spatulas, valued for their smooth surfaces that will not scratch delicate materials, help position patches and spread adhesives. Wooden presses, carved from dense hardwoods and designed with adjustable pressure mechanisms, flatten repaired areas while the adhesives cure. Quality assessment of papyrus itself required expert knowledge that took years to develop. Demetrius can determine a scroll's approximate age, origin, and previous storage conditions simply by examining the papyrus texture, color, and flexibility. High-quality papyrus from the Nile Delta develops a characteristic golden patina with age, while lower grades from southern Egypt tend toward brown or grey discoloration as the plant fibers deteriorate. The workshop maintains an extensive collection of reference materials that guide conservation decisions. Sample books containing papyrus specimens from different periods and regions help conservators identify appropriate repair materials. Detailed diagrams illustrate proper handling techniques for various types of damage. Written procedures, copied and recopied to preserve institutional knowledge, document successful treatment methods, and warn against approaches that proved harmful. Most people assume that ancient conservators worked entirely by trial and error, but Roman libraries actually maintained detailed treatment records for individual scrolls. These records, written on wooden tablets designed for long-term storage, tracked every intervention performed on important texts. This documentation helped conservators understand which treatments aged well and which caused problems over time. The chemical knowledge underlying Roman conservation techniques was surprisingly advanced. Conservators understood that alkaline conditions helped neutralize acids that formed as papyrus aged, leading them to develop buffering treatments using lime water and other basic solutions. They recognized that certain metal-based inks could corrode papyrus and developed methods for isolating problematic text areas to prevent damage from spreading. Seasonal variations affected conservation work in predictable ways. Winter's lower humidity made papyrus more brittle, requiring extra care during handling and different adhesive formulations that remained flexible in dry conditions. Summer's higher moisture levels softened papyrus, but increased mold risk, leading conservators to adjust their fumigation schedules and monitor storage areas more frequently. The economics of conservation created interesting priorities within Roman libraries. Extremely rare texts received unlimited resources for preservation, while more common works might be allowed to deteriorate if copying them proved more cost-effective than extensive repair. This triage approach ensured that limited conservation resources focused on truly irreplaceable materials, though it also meant that some texts were lost that might have been saved with different economic calculations. Advanced conservation techniques included methods for dealing with ink problems that modern conservators would recognize. Faded text could sometimes be enhanced using weak chemical solutions that reacted with iron-based inks to darken them temporarily. Bleeding inks that threatened to stain adjacent papyrus areas were treated with absorbent materials and consolidating agents that locked the pigments in place. The relationship between scribes and conservators involved constant collaboration and mutual education. Scribes learned to recognize early signs of deterioration that required conservation attention, while conservators understood copying practices well enough to guide decisions about when repair was worthwhile versus when recopying offered better long-term preservation. This professional partnership ensured that both new works and existing collections received appropriate care. Disaster preparedness, while not as systematic as modern approaches, still played a role in Roman library management. Conservation workshops maintained emergency supplies of repair materials and portable tools that could be quickly deployed if fire, flood, or other catastrophes damaged collections. Conservators developed rapid stabilization techniques for disaster-damaged materials. focusing on preventing further deterioration until more comprehensive treatment could be provided. The training of conservation specialists followed apprenticeship models similar to those used for scribes, but with additional emphasis on understanding materials, science, and chemical interactions. Master conservators tested their students' knowledge by presenting damaged scrolls with deliberately obscured provenance, requiring apprentices to determine appropriate treatment methods based solely on physical examination and understanding of materials' behavior. Quality control in conservation work involved multiple verification steps that prevented well-intentioned treatments from causing unintended damage. Before applying any chemical treatment, conservators tested their solutions on sample materials or inconspicuous areas of the actual scroll. After completing repairs, they monitored treated areas for specified periods to ensure that the interventions remained stable and did not cause new problems. The philosophy underlying Roman conservation practices emphasized minimal intervention and maximum reversibility, principles that align closely with modern conservation ethics. Conservators preferred treatments that strengthened existing materials rather than replacing them, and they avoided alterations that could not be undone if better methods became available. This approach reflected a deep respect for the original craftsmen who created the scrolls and an understanding that conservation work should enhance rather than replace original materials. Storage systems for conservation materials themselves required careful attention to prevent the tools of preservation from deteriorating. Adhesives were stored in sealed containers with desiccants to prevent moisture absorption. Brushes were cleaned with specific solvents and stored with protective caps to maintain their precise tips. Metal tools received regular oiling to prevent corrosion that could transfer to delicate papyrus surfaces during use. The workshop's lighting system used polished bronze mirrors and white marble surfaces to maximize natural illumination while filtering out the ultraviolet wavelengths most damaging to papyrus. Conservators understood that prolonged exposure to bright light accelerated deterioration, leading them to work in short sessions with frequent breaks that allowed scrolls to rest in darker conditions. This balance between adequate working light and preservation needs required careful scheduling and workspace design. The cataloguing chamber adjacent to the main reading hall buzzes with quiet activity as librarians update the master inventory scrolls that serve as the library's organizational backbone. These catalogue scrolls, some stretching over 40 feet when fully unrolled, represent one of Rome's greatest administrative achievements. A senior cataloguer named Fabius sits cross-legged on a cushioned mat, methodically working through entries with the patience that his profession demands. The Roman classification system defied the simple alphabetical organization that many assumed dominated ancient libraries. Instead, librarians developed a sophisticated subject-based hierarchy that grouped related knowledge together in ways that encouraged scholarly discovery. Mathematics lived alongside astronomy because Romans understood their interconnected nature. Military treatises occupied shelves near geographical works, reflecting the practical needs of commanders planning campaigns in distant lands. Most people think ancient librarians simply stuffed scrolls onto shelves wherever space allowed, but Roman organization actually followed precise spatial logic that maximized both storage efficiency and retrieval speed. The most frequently consulted works occupied waist-high shelves in the central areas, reducing the physical strain on both staff and patrons. Rare or fragile texts rested in protected alcoves where temperature and humidity remained most stable. Fabius examines a newly arrived scroll containing Pliny's observations on natural phenomena. Before this work can join the collection, it must receive what Romans called a complete bibliographic analysis. This process involves far more than simply recording the title and author. Cataloguers noted the scroll's physical dimensions, the quality of papyrus used, the scribe's handwriting style, and even details about the ink formulation that might affect long-term preservation needs. The bone labels attached to each scroll contain abbreviated information using a standardized notation system that took years for librarians to master completely. These symbols, carved with tiny bronze tools, compress complex bibliographic data into spaces no larger than a child's palm. A trained cataloguer can read these labels at a glance, determining not just the work's identity, but also its condition status, copying history, and access restrictions. Colour coding played a crucial role in Roman library organisation, though this aspect rarely survives in historical accounts because the pigments have long since faded. Different coloured strings attached to scroll cases indicated subject categories, with red reserved for historical works, blue for philosophy, and green for poetry. Purple strings, made from expensive Tyrian dye, marked imperial documents and works by officially sanctioned authors. The master catalogue scrolls themselves represent marvels of information management that predate modern library science by over a millennium. Each entry follows a standardized format that includes cross-references to related works, notes about variant versions in other libraries, and assessments of textual accuracy based on comparison with multiple sources. These catalogues were copied and distributed to other major libraries throughout the empire, creating networks of shared knowledge that facilitated scholarly exchange. Contrary to popular assumptions about ancient record-keeping, Roman librarians maintained detailed statistics about collection usage that would impress modern administrators. Wooden tablets tracked which scrolls were consulted most frequently, how long patrons typically spent with specific texts, and which subject areas generated the most research activity. This data guided acquisition decisions and helped librarians anticipate patron needs. The classification of new works sometimes sparked heated debates among library staff, particularly when texts crossed traditional subject boundaries or introduced entirely novel concepts. A committee of senior librarians would convene to discuss problematic classifications, consulting with outside scholars when necessary. These discussions, recorded on wax tablets for institutional memory, reveal the intellectual rigour that Romans brought to organising human knowledge. Geographic organisation within subject categories reflected Roman understanding of how knowledge travelled and evolved across their empire. Greek philosophical works occupied separate sections from Roman adaptations of the same ideas, allowing scholars to trace the development of concepts as they moved between cultures. Medical texts were similarly divided between traditional Roman practices and newer techniques imported from Egypt, Mesopotamia, and other conquered territories. The physical arrangement of scrolls within individual storage units followed specific patterns designed to prevent damage and facilitate access. Heavier scrolls anchored the bottom of each shelf, while lighter works rested above them to prevent crashing. Scrolls of similar diameter were grouped together to maximize space utilization and create uniform visual organization that made missing items immediately obvious to library staff. Dating systems in Roman catalogues combined multiple chronological frameworks that modern librarians would find bewilderingly complex. Works were dated by the year of composition when known, the consulship during which they were copied, and sometimes by reference to significant historical events. This multi-layered approach reflected Roman understanding that texts existed in multiple temporal contexts that affected their interpretation and significance. The process of updating catalogue entries required extraordinary attention to detail and institutional memory that spanned generations. When new editions or variant versions of existing works entered the collection, cataloguers had to determine their relationship to existing holdings and update cross-references accordingly. Senior cataloguers maintained personal notebooks documenting these relationships, creating unofficial guides that helped newer staff navigate the collection's complexities. Quality control in cataloguing involved multiple verification steps that prevented errors from corrupting the master records. Every new entry was reviewed by at least 2 different cataloguers, with discrepancies resolved through consultation with subject specialists. Periodic audits compared catalogue entries against physical holdings, identifying missing scrolls or misfiled materials that required investigation. Most people imagine Roman libraries as chaotic repositories, where finding specific texts required luck as much as skill. But the reality involved sophisticated search strategies that librarians taught to serious researchers. Patrons learned to use subject hierarchies and cross-reference systems that could lead them from general topics to increasingly specific subtopics, eventually locating exactly the information they sought. The handling of duplicate copies presented particular organizational challenges that Roman librarians solved through innovative approaches. Rather than treating multiple copies as identical items, cataloguers noted variations in text quality, physical condition, and provenance that made each copy unique. The best preserved copy of important works was designated as the reference version, while others were marked for general circulation or educational use. Acquisition records integrated seamlessly with catalogue systems, tracking how new materials entered the collection and from what sources. These records noted whether works arrived through purchase, donation, or copying projects, information that proved valuable when questions arose about textual authenticity or legal ownership. Detailed provenance documentation helped librarians verify the accuracy of texts by tracing their copying history back to authoritative sources. The standardization of cataloguing practices across different Roman libraries created one of history's first examples of cooperative library networks. Traveling scholars could consult catalogue formats familiar from their home institutions, while librarians could communicate effectively about shared collections and coordinate acquisition efforts to avoid unnecessary duplication of expensive copying projects. Access control systems reflected Roman social hierarchies while maintaining scholarly functionality that served legitimate research needs. Catalogue entries included notations about access restrictions, indicating which scrolls required special permission to consult and which were available to general readers. These restrictions were based not just on content sensitivity, but also on physical fragility and replacement costs. The integration of patron services with catalogue systems allowed librarians to provide personalised research assistance that enhanced the value of their collections. Regular patrons could request that librarians identify new acquisitions in their areas of interest, while visiting scholars received guidance navigating unfamiliar subject classifications. These services required intimate knowledge of both collection contents and individual patron interests. Error correction in catalogue systems followed formal procedures that balance accuracy against the enormous labour required to maintain perfect records. Minor errors might be corrected during routine catalogue updates, while significant mistakes triggered formal review processes that could result in reclassification of entire subject sections. These procedures reflected Roman administrative values that prioritized systematic approaches over quick fixes. The physical production of catalogue scrolls required specialized scribes who understood both the technical vocabulary of library science and the abbreviated notation systems used to compress information efficiently. These catalogue scribes occupied respected positions within library hierarchies, as their work directly affected the usability of entire collections. Their clear handwriting and consistent formatting made the difference between catalogues that facilitated research and those that hindered it. Seasonal maintenance routines included systematic review of catalogue accuracy, with different subject sections examined according to rotating schedules that ensured complete coverage over time. These reviews identified catalogue entries that needed updating, cross-references that had become obsolete, and physical locations that required adjustment due to collection growth or reorganisation. The quiet rhythm of this ongoing work maintained the organisational integrity that made Roman libraries functional centres of learning rather than mere storage facilities for scrolls. The morning hours bring the library's most dedicated patrons, who arrive as soon as the bronze doors swing open to admit the first rays of sunlight. Senator Gaius Flavius enters with the measured pace of someone accustomed to authority, his toga carefully arranged to display the purple stripe that marks his senatorial rank. Behind him walks his personal slave, Alexandros, carrying wax tablets and writing materials in a leather satchel. Most people assume that only the wealthy elite used Roman libraries, but actually the reading public included a surprisingly diverse mix of social classes and professions. Alexandros possesses literacy skills that surpass those of many freeborn Romans, a reminder that education and social status did not always align in the ancient world. Greek slaves, particularly those captured during military campaigns in educated regions, often served as secretaries, tutors, and research assistants to their Roman masters. The irony that conquered peoples frequently taught their conquerors was not lost on thoughtful Romans, though few openly acknowledged this intellectual dependence. A group of young men clusters around a reading table, sharing a scroll containing Cicero's rhetorical exercises. These students, preparing for careers in law or politics, represent the backbone of library patronage during morning hours. Roman education emphasized memorization and recitation, but libraries provided opportunities for deeper study that supplemented formal schooling. The soft murmur of their discussion mingles with the rustle of papyrus as they debate interpretations of complex legal arguments. The reading techniques employed by Roman library patrons differed significantly from modern silent reading practices. Most Romans read aloud even when studying alone because their writing systems lacked the word spacing and punctuation that facilitate silent comprehension. The gentle sound of multiple voices quietly reading different texts creates a multilingual hum throughout the reading halls as Greek philosophical works mix with Latin poetry and technical treatises in various specialist vocabularies. Near the philosophy section, an elderly freedwoman named Julia examines a scroll containing Stoic teachings about virtue and happiness. Her presence challenges assumptions about gender roles in Roman intellectual life. While formal education remained largely restricted to men, wealthy women increasingly pursued learning through private tutors and library study. Julia's careful notation-taking suggests serious scholarly engagement rather than casual browsing, reflecting the intellectual ambitions that some Roman women pursued despite social limitations. The mechanics of sharing scrolls required sophisticated social protocols that library patrons learned through observation and instruction. When multiple readers wanted to consult the same text, they developed systems for taking turns that respected both social hierarchies and legitimate research needs. A senator's research naturally took priority over a student's casual reading, but established scholars could claim precedence over newcomers regardless of social rank when pursuing serious academic work. Physical comfort during extended reading sessions presented challenges that Romans addressed through furniture design and reading techniques adapted to scroll formats. Curved reading stands carved from expensive woods and adjusted to individual height preferences supported heavy scrolls while allowing readers to maintain proper posture. Cushioned benches provided seating that could accommodate the lateral movement required to navigate lengthy texts, while small side tables held writing materials and reference notes. The afternoon brings different types of library users with varying needs and expectations. Merchants consulting geographical works cluster near maps and travel accounts, seeking practical information about trade routes, local customs, and currency exchanges in distant provinces. Their conversations, conducted in the practical Latin of commerce rather than the elevated rhetoric of senatorial speeches, reveal how libraries served economic as well as intellectual purposes. A visiting scholar from Alexandria examines Roman historical works with the critical eye of someone comparing different national perspectives on shared events. These international exchanges of knowledge represented one of the Roman library system's greatest achievements. Scholars could travel throughout the empire confident of finding familiar organizational systems and comparable collections, facilitating research projects that spanned multiple cities and drew on diverse intellectual traditions. Most people think ancient libraries operated in complete silence like modern reading rooms, but Roman libraries actually encouraged discussion and collaborative study that enhanced learning through social interaction. Reading groups formed naturally around popular texts, with experienced readers guiding newcomers through difficult passages. These informal teaching relationships created knowledge networks that extended learning beyond formal educational institutions. The late afternoon witnesses the arrival of professional scribes seeking source materials for commissioned copying projects. These craftsmen, working for wealthy patrons who wanted personal copies of popular works, needed access to the most accurate versions available. Their practiced eyes could quickly identify textual variants and copying errors that might compromise the quality of their finished products, making libraries essential resources for the commercial manuscript trade. Access restrictions affected different patrons in varying ways that reflected Roman social hierarchies, while accommodating practical research needs. Slaves could enter libraries only when accompanying their masters or carrying written permission for specific research tasks. Women faced varying restrictions depending on local customs and the particular institution's policies. Foreign visitors needed introductions from respected local citizens or credentials from their home city's educational institutions. The evening hours transform the library's atmosphere as oil lamps replace natural lighting and create intimate spaces for intensive study. Advanced scholars often preferred these quieter periods when casual browsers had departed and serious research could proceed without interruption. The flickering light casts dancing shadows across scroll cases and creates a contemplative environment that many found conducive to deep thinking. and complex analysis. Payment systems for library access varied considerably across the empire, reflecting local economic conditions and institutional funding arrangements. Some libraries charged admission fees that effectively restricted access to wealthy patrons, while others operated through public funding that made them available to broader audiences. Private libraries attached to wealthy households often opened their collections to approved scholars, creating informal networks of intellectual exchange that crossed social boundaries. The relationship between library staff and patrons involved complex negotiations between service and scholarship that required diplomatic skills from both parties. Librarians possessed expert knowledge that could dramatically enhance research efficiency, but they also served as gatekeepers who controlled access to valuable materials. Successful patrons learned to cultivate relationships with library staff through respect, courtesy, and sometimes strategic gifts that ensured favourable treatment. Research methodologies developed by Roman library users demonstrate sophisticated understanding of how to extract information from scroll-based collections. Experienced scholars created personal indexing systems using wax tablets to track important passages across multiple works, enabling them to synthesize information from diverse sources. These techniques required considerable skill and patience, as scrolls could not be easily bookmarked or cross-referenced like modern books. The social dynamics of library use reflected broader Roman attitudes toward knowledge, learning, and cultural authority. Greek texts enjoyed prestige that sometimes exceeded their practical value, while Roman innovations in law, engineering, and administration received less scholarly attention despite their immediate relevance. These preferences influenced patron behaviour and shaped the intellectual climate within library walls. Specialised patron groups developed distinct usage patterns that librarians learned to accommodate and support. Medical students required access to anatomical diagrams and pharmaceutical recipes that demanded careful handling due to their detailed illustrations. Legal researchers needed rapid access to case precedents and statutory compilations that were organised differently from literary works. Military officers studying engineering texts brought practical experience that complemented theoretical knowledge found in scrolls. The preservation of patron privacy, while not systematically protected as in modern libraries, still received consideration from thoughtful librarians who understood that intellectual freedom required some discretion about reading choices. Political works, philosophical treatises that challenged conventional beliefs, and personal correspondence that patrons studied for various reasons were handled with appropriate confidentiality by professional library staff. Seasonal patterns in library usage reflected both practical considerations and cultural rhythms that shaped Roman intellectual life. Winter months brought increased scholarly activity as outdoor pursuits became less attractive, and heating systems made indoor study more comfortable. Summer heat drove many patrons to seek the cool stone interiors of library buildings, while spring and autumn offered ideal conditions for extended research projects that required sustained concentration. The integration of library resources with broader educational and professional networks created multiplier effects that extended the influence of collections far beyond their immediate users. Scholars who consulted library materials often incorporated their findings into lectures, legal arguments, political speeches, and written works that reached much larger audiences. This indirect influence made libraries crucial nodes in the intellectual networks that shaped Roman culture and policy. Young apprentices in various trades increasingly sought library access to supplement their practical training with theoretical knowledge that could enhance their professional prospects. Architects studied mathematical treatises and engineering manuals that informed their design work. Physicians consulted medical texts that expanded their understanding beyond what they learned through direct apprenticeship. These crossover uses demonstrated how libraries served practical as well as purely scholarly functions in Roman society. Deep within the library's most protected chambers lies a collection that represents the accumulated treasures of centuries. Here, behind bronze doors fitted with intricate lock mechanisms that require 2 keys turned simultaneously, rest the manuscripts that define the very essence of Roman intellectual achievement. The air itself feels different in this sanctuary, cooler and somehow more precious, scented with the rare oils and resins used only for the most valuable texts. The chief curator, Marcus Caecilius, moves through these hallowed spaces with reverent care. His hands, softer than those of ordinary librarians, due to the fine oils used in handling the most delicate materials, select a scroll case made from ivory and inlaid with gold wire. The case itself cost more than most Romans earned in a year, yet it houses a treasure beyond monetary calculation, the only surviving copy of Ennius's complete Annales, the epic poem that defined Roman literary identity before Virgil's. Aeneid claimed that honour. Most people assume that ancient libraries valued texts purely for their content, but Roman special collections actually considered rarity, provenance, and physical beauty as equally important factors. This ivory case contains papyrus made from the finest Egyptian reeds, harvested during optimal growing conditions and processed by craftsmen whose techniques remained closely guarded secrets. The text was copied by Apollodorus, whose calligraphy was so renowned that his signature alone added tremendous value to any manuscript. Adjacent alcoves house collections that reveal the sophisticated global networks through which rare materials reached Roman libraries. A small shelf holds scrolls written on parchment made from gazelle hide, imported from North Africa at enormous expense. These texts, containing astronomical observations recorded by Alexandrian scholars, demonstrate calculation methods that wouldn't be rediscovered in Europe for another 1,000 years. The parchment's unusual golden colour comes from special tanning processes using rare desert plants. The temperature control system in these special chambers operates independently from the main library's hypercaust heating. Slaves trained specifically for this purpose monitor bronze thermometers and adjust ventilation systems twice daily to maintain conditions that maximize preservation of the most irreplaceable materials. The Romans discovered that rapid temperature changes caused more damage than moderate but stable conditions, leading them to prioritize consistency over absolute ideal temperatures. Marcus carefully examines a scroll containing what may be the oldest surviving copy of Homer's Odyssey, written entirely in purple ink. This extravagant use of Tyrian dye, extracted from thousands of murex shells, created texts so expensive that only imperial libraries could afford them. The purple text shimmers against cream-coloured papyrus in the lamplight, creating an almost hypnotic visual effect that transforms reading into a multi-sensory experience of luxury and scholarship combined. Contrary to popular belief, Roman special collections were not simply random accumulations of old or expensive books. Curators followed systematic acquisition policies designed to preserve specific types of knowledge that were most vulnerable to loss. They particularly sought the personal papers of famous authors, understanding that these informal writings often contained insights unavailable in their polished public works. A small cedar box holds Cicero's private correspondence with his publisher, revealing the business side of Roman literary culture that formal histories never recorded. The authentication processes used to verify the genuineness of precious manuscripts would impress modern forensic experts. Curators examined papyrus fibre patterns under magnification, analysed ink compositions using chemical tests, and compared handwriting samples against authenticated examples. They maintained reference collections of genuine materials from different periods and regions, enabling them to detect forgeries that less sophisticated buyers might accept as authentic. Storage systems for the most valuable texts involved multiple layers of protection that reflected Roman engineering ingenuity. Individual scrolls rest in nested containers, with the innermost cases made from aromatic woods that repel insects, surrounded by metal containers that prevent moisture penetration, all enclosed within stone compartments carved directly into the library's walls. These storage systems could preserve texts for centuries, even if the building itself suffered damage. The lighting systems in special collection areas used polished silver mirrors and crystal lenses to focus natural light precisely where curators needed it for detailed examination work. Oil lamps, despite their utility in other library areas, were completely banned from these chambers due to fire risks that could destroy irreplaceable materials. Evening work proceeded only during full moon periods when moonlight provided adequate illumination for essential maintenance tasks. A separate room houses what Romans called the imperial collection, manuscripts that belonged personally to various emperors and were deposited for safekeeping after their deaths. These scrolls, marked with special imperial seals and stored in purple silk wrappings, include private memoirs, strategic military plans, and correspondence with foreign rulers that provides unprecedented insights into Roman imperial decision-making. Access to these materials required written permission from the current emperor, making them effectively off-limits to all but the most privileged scholars. The manuscript copying protocols for special collection items involved elaborate security measures that prevented unauthorized duplication. Only master scribes with proven loyalty and exceptional skills were permitted to handle these texts, and they worked under constant supervision in locked rooms. Each copying session was recorded in detail, noting which sections were copied, how much progress was made, and what materials were consumed in the process. Most people imagine that ancient rare book collections focused primarily on classical literature, but Roman special collections actually emphasized practical knowledge that had immediate strategic value. Military engineering manuals, siege warfare techniques, and metallurgical processes were guarded as carefully as poetry or philosophy. A bronze case contains detailed plans for Roman road construction methods, information so sensitive that unauthorized possession could result in charges of treason. The provenance documentation for special collection items reads like a catalogue of Roman imperial history. Scrolls bear acquisition notes indicating they were seized during the conquest of Alexandria, purchased from the estate of executed senators, or donated by grateful client kings seeking imperial favour. These ownership histories provide invaluable context for understanding how knowledge moved through Roman society and across the boundaries of the empire. Conservation techniques for the most precious manuscripts involved experimental methods that pushed Roman chemical knowledge to its limits. Curators developed specialized consolidating agents using rare imported resins, created custom storage environments using desiccants made from precisely ground minerals, and employed fumigation techniques using aromatic substances that required months of preparation. The results of these treatments were carefully documented to guide future conservation decisions. The security measures protecting special collections extended far beyond locked doors and restricted access. Guard rotations ensured that the chambers were never left unattended, while sophisticated alarm systems using bronze bells and tripwires would alert the entire library staff to unauthorized intrusion attempts. The Romans understood that these collections represented not just scholarly resources, but also potential intelligence targets for foreign enemies. Valuation systems for rare manuscripts considered factors that modern collectors would recognize: age, rarity, condition, historical significance, and aesthetic appeal. However, Romans also valued texts based on their potential military, political, or economic applications, leading them to prize practical manuals and technical treatises that later generations might overlook. Detailed appraisal records, maintained for insurance and inheritance purposes, provide fascinating insights into how Romans assigned monetary value to intellectual property. The social rituals surrounding access to special collections reflected the sacred nature Romans attributed to certain forms of knowledge. Visitors underwent purification ceremonies involving hand washing with specially scented water, and wore clean white togas reserved specifically for these occasions. These protocols served practical purposes by reducing contamination risks, but they also reinforced the psychological sense that consulting these texts was a privilege requiring appropriate reverence. International diplomacy occasionally involved the exchange of rare manuscripts between allied cities or client kingdoms, making special collections important tools of soft power projection. Roman libraries acquired Persian astronomical texts through diplomatic negotiations, while Greek cities received copies of Roman legal codes as gifts symbolizing their integration into the imperial system. These exchanges required careful authentication to ensure that both parties received materials of equivalent value. The research applications of special collection materials often focused on solving immediate practical problems rather than pursuing abstract scholarly interests. Military commanders consulted ancient battle accounts before planning campaigns in similar terrain, while architects studied engineering manuals from previous centuries to solve construction challenges. This emphasis on practical utility ensured that even the most precious manuscripts remained active tools rather than mere museum pieces. Quality control in special collections. Maintenance involved regular condition assessments that documented the physical state of each manuscript in exhaustive detail. Curators noted changes in color, flexibility, text legibility, and structural integrity using standardized terminology that allowed comparisons across time. These records helped identify which preservation techniques worked effectively and which caused unintended damage, gradually improving conservation methods through systematic observation. The emotional impact of working with these treasures affected even the most experienced library staff in ways that formal job descriptions never captured. Curators spoke reverently about holding scrolls that had been touched by famous authors, reading words that survived from vanished civilizations, and preserving knowledge that might otherwise disappear forever. This sense of stewardship created deep personal connections between library staff and their collections that motivated extraordinary dedication to preservation work. As evening approaches and the special collections chambers prepare for their nightly rest, the bronze doors close with the soft finality of a sacred ritual. The treasures within, protected by layers of human care and Roman engineering, settle into the darkness that has preserved them through centuries of empire, conquest and change, waiting patiently for tomorrow's scholars to continue the eternal conversation between past and future that defines the very essence of learning. As the sun sets over the 7 hills of Rome, the library's daily rhythms begin their gentle transition toward evening stillness. The bronze sundial in the main courtyard casts longer shadows across polished marble, marking time's passage in the same measured way that these halls have witnessed the accumulation of human knowledge for generations. The soft sounds of scrolls being returned to their cases, labels being checked one final time, and oil lamps being lit to create a symphony of scholarly devotion that has echoed through these spaces for centuries. Marcus, the head librarian, conducts his final inspection of the day with the quiet satisfaction of someone who understands the profound importance of seemingly routine tasks. His weathered hands trace familiar paths along shelf edges, checking that each scroll case rests securely in its designated position. The bone labels catch the lamplight as he passes, their careful inscriptions representing thousands of hours of meticulous cataloguing work that transforms random collections of texts into organized repositories of human wisdom. The cataloguing chamber grows quiet as Fabius rolls up the master inventory scrolls that have guided the day's organizational work. These lengthy documents, with their careful notations and cross-references, embody the Roman genius for systematic administration that made their vast empire possible. The same methodical approach that governed provincial taxation and military logistics also shaped how knowledge was collected, preserved, and made accessible to future generations. In the conservation workshop, Demetrius carefully stores his delicate tools and covers the partially repaired scrolls that will await tomorrow's attention. The consolidating solutions and adhesives rest in their sealed containers, ready to continue the endless battle against time and decay that threatens every written work. His efforts, multiplied across hundreds of similar workshops throughout the empire, represent humanity's first systematic attempt to preserve knowledge for posterity, rather than allowing it to disappear with each passing generation. The reading halls empty gradually, as patrons complete their research and return to evening obligations in the world beyond these walls. Senator Flavius departs with his slave Alexandros, carrying notes that will influence tomorrow's political debates in the forum. The young law students gather their materials, their minds filled with rhetorical strategies and legal precedents that will shape their future careers. Julia, the freedwoman philosopher, carefully rolls her scroll of Stoic teachings, finding in ancient wisdom the guidance she seeks for modern challenges. Most people today imagine Roman libraries as dusty repositories for scholars pursuing abstract knowledge. But the reality involved dynamic institutions that served practical needs across Roman society. These libraries provided the information infrastructure that enabled imperial administration, supported commercial enterprises, guided military campaigns, and educated the citizens who maintained Roman civilization. The quiet work of librarians, scribes, and conservators created the foundation for everything from engineering projects to diplomatic negotiations. The special collections chambers settle into their protected silence, their treasures safely enclosed behind bronze doors and sophisticated security systems. These precious manuscripts, representing the pinnacle of ancient literary and scientific achievement, remind us that Romans understood knowledge as humanity's most valuable inheritance. They invested enormous resources in preserving texts, not because they generated immediate profit, but because they recognized that civilizations rise and fall on their ability to transmit wisdom across generations. The evening lamplight flickers across wooden reading stands and marble floors, illuminating a scene that captures the essential spirit of Roman intellectual culture. Here, in these halls dedicated to learning, the boundaries between social classes blurred as shared curiosity brought together senators and freedmen, Romans and foreigners, men and women in pursuit of understanding. The democratic nature of knowledge, accessible to anyone with literacy and determination, represented one of Rome's greatest contributions to human civilization. The sophisticated systems that governed these libraries, from climate control to cataloguing protocols, demonstrate Roman engineering and administrative capabilities that modern institutions still admire. The hypercoursed heating systems that maintain stable temperatures, the optical devices that focused natural light for detailed work, and the chemical treatments that extended papyrus life all reflect the same innovative thinking that built aqueducts, roads, and amphitheatres throughout the empire. As library staff complete their evening routines, the rhythms of their work connect them to centuries of predecessors who performed similar tasks with equal dedication. The master scribe who carefully cleaned his reed pens, the cataloguer who verified scroll locations one final time, the conservator who monitored humidity levels in storage areas, all participated in traditions that transformed individual texts into collective memory that could survive political upheavals and cultural changes. The international character of Roman libraries, with their Greek librarians, Egyptian papyrus, Lebanese cedar oil, and manuscripts from throughout the known world, illustrates how knowledge transcends political boundaries and cultural differences. These institutions served as meeting places where different intellectual traditions encountered each other, creating the synthesis of Greek learning and Roman practicality that defined classical civilization for future generations. The economic investments that Romans made in their libraries, from expensive materials to skilled labour, reveal how seriously they took their role as custodians of human knowledge. The cedar oil that protected scrolls from insects, the bronze tools that enabled precise conservation work, and the specialized training that created expert librarians all required significant financial commitments that reflected genuine understanding of knowledge's long-term value. The social protocols that governed library use, while reflecting Roman hierarchical values, also demonstrated remarkable inclusiveness for their historical period. The presence of women scholars, foreign researchers, and educated slaves in these intellectual spaces shows how the pursuit of knowledge could sometimes overcome the barriers that separated different groups in Roman society. Libraries served as neutral ground where merit and curiosity mattered more than birth or wealth. The preservation techniques developed by Roman conservators, based on careful observation and systematic experimentation, established principles that modern conservation science still follows. Their emphasis on minimal intervention, reversible treatments, and detailed documentation reflects sophisticated understanding of preservation ethics that prioritized long-term stability over short-term convenience. As darkness settles over the library complex, the oil lamps burn lower and the staff prepares for night's rest. The scrolls rest safely in their cases. The catalogues lie ready for tomorrow's consultations, and the conservation workshops stand prepared to continue their patient work of preservation. The quiet that descends on these halls carries within it the accumulated wisdom of ages, waiting patiently for dawn to bring new scholars seeking answers to eternal questions. The Roman library system, with its careful organization, dedicated staff, and systematic approach to knowledge preservation, created a model that influenced educational institutions for centuries afterward. The methods they developed for cataloguing, the standards they established for conservation, and the services they provided to diverse communities of users all contributed to traditions that connect ancient scholarship to modern academic life. In these peaceful halls where papyrus whispers against itself and bronze labels catch the lamplight, we find the origins of humanity's systematic effort to preserve and share knowledge across time and space. The Roman librarians who catalogued these scrolls, the scribes who copied these texts, and the conservators who protected these treasures understood that they were not merely managing collections of books, but serving as guardians of civilization itself. The gentle sounds of evening in the library, from the soft closing of scroll cases to the measured footsteps of departing scholars, create a timeless rhythm that connects us across centuries to those who shared our passion for learning and discovery. In their dedication to preserving knowledge, organizing information, and serving scholarly communities, these ancient librarians established traditions that continue to guide those who believe that wisdom shared is wisdom multiplied. As the last oil lamp dims and the library settles into restful silence, the scrolls rest secure in their cedar-scented cases, their knowledge preserved for another day, another generation, another millennium of human curiosity and wonder. Thank you for joining us on this peaceful journey through the quiet halls of ancient Rome. If you enjoyed our work and are still awake, check out our other content exploring the gentle rhythms of history. And if you have fallen asleep, rest well and enjoy the rain.